It is officially mid-February and you are already feeling behind. Now we know you probably started January strong, right? You got discipline, you got focus, you got motivated, and you started to turn that into some tangible wins. But then life happened. You got challenged, you got stressed, you started to drift towards your old habits, and now you're feeling frustrated, you're feeling defeated, and even worse, you're telling yourself that same BS story that you are failing again. Now here's what's great. If that's where you're at, I have some good news, which is you haven't failed. You haven't lost discipline, you haven't lost willpower, you've simply lost momentum. And so today what we're going to talk about is why does this keep happening in your fitness journey so you can start anticipating it and get on the other side. And more importantly, how do you start again today fresh and regain the momentum that you need in order to make your goals become a reality. Now, for those of you who are new here, my name is Brian Pickowitz. I'm one of the head coaches and co-founders here at The Fitness Project, where we focus on building fit, healthy leaders. For the last decade, we've helped over 1,000 business owners, professionals, and executives really dial in the way they're leading themselves in the category of their fitness and health. Because when you are fit and you're healthy, you have a level of energy, confidence, and, let's say, focus that leads you through everything that you do in your life. And so today we're talking about momentum, because momentum is one of the most powerful forces that you can have on your side. Think of it as a compounding effect. When you have momentum on your side, everything else gets easier. Execution becomes clear. You start to see wins even where you weren't looking for them, and your ability to follow through is amplified. Versus when you lose that sense of momentum, you start to feel slower. You start to feel like everything else is much harder for you to win with. And it requires a lot more energy for you to start pushing towards the goals that you want to accomplish. You can think of it as the same as the laws of physics. When an object is in motion, it tends to stay in motion. Whereas an object at rest requires a lot more energy to get it moving again. And your habits follow that same principle, right? When you are already exercising, it's a lot easier to keep exercising. When you're already eating healthy, it's a lot easier to follow through with those same habits. Versus when you take a week off or a month off, or you start telling yourself that crappy story that things just can't work for you in this category, it requires much more energy, much more motivation, and a lot more willpower to keep yourself moving towards where you want to be. Now, what's great is it's not random. This happens for a reason. If you can start to understand why it happens, it's a lot easier to change. What's really important to know about momentum is most people don't fail. They just simply drift. And so you can think of it as this drift loop that tends to happen again and again and again. And so most people, they come into a goal, or let's say New Year's, and they set a high bar. They get motivated. They say, I'm going to make a change, and they rev themselves up. And when they do that, they set this really high standard that they think that they have to focus on consistently in order to achieve their goal. And usually they'll do really well on that path for a few weeks, right? You start strong, you start pushing, and you start to accrue wins. But then inevitably life happens, and that can be stress in your work, and you start to do really great, and so you take a step off the gas. It can be that something really challenging happens in your family life, or you just start to lose focus on your goal. It could also be that you can't keep that high standard, and so you start to beat yourself up because you're telling yourself, oh my gosh, I told myself I was going to do this and now I'm not. And you start to judge yourself. And so once you start judging yourself, once that starts to happen, you start to drift. You drift. And in order to meet some of that frustration, right, in order to cope with some of that emotion of feeling like you're not being perfect, you tend to go back to your old habits. And those old habits are there to keep you comfortable. That might be you eat a certain way, you skip a workout, or you don't go to bed on time. Whatever it is, you start to drift to that comfort zone. And inevitably, that leads you off track until the point where you step on the scale again, or you see a photo, or something triggers you, and you get motivated again. And so this drift loop doesn't just happen around New Year's, it happens anytime you start to lose momentum. And what's great is if you can recognize the pattern, if you can start to see, okay, I set a really high bar, I didn't exactly hit my target, and I'm starting to drift, that's actually we want to interrupt the pattern and move in the opposite direction. Now, it's important to know, just because you lost momentum doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you've drifted. And so in order to get back on track, what we have to do is we have to assess in real time where we are and then be committed to making progress again. And you can really think of momentum as the byproduct of three simple things. First, it's your perception of your progress. And so what happens for a lot of people is they want to lose 30 pounds and they lose 5. And they start to tell themselves, well, I wanted to have this goal accomplished in 6 months. Okay, well, based off of where I'm at, I'm not going to really reach the goal. And so you start to kind of drift because you tell yourself, I'm not going to accomplish it at all, or I'm not going to get there in the time that I wanted. Or another example of perception of progress, you focus on everything that's going wrong versus everything that's going right. And so even though you might have won in 9 areas, there's one category that you really wanted to win in. And because you focus all your attention on that category, you start to discount everything else that's going right. And so it's really important. You have to be mindful of what you're focusing on. Because if you start focusing on everything that's going wrong, it's going to magnify. You're going to feel it more. The second element of momentum is our emotional state. So it's really important. If you're feeling frustrated in one category of life, you don't allow that to bleed into another. So if you're feeling frustrated in your business because you're pushing, it's really important you don't take that to your fitness. Or if you're feeling overwhelmed by one category of your life, you need to be able to bring a different state to your health and fitness, or else it will bleed over and you'll stop executing. Whatever you're feeling at any given time impacts your execution in other categories. So we have to be mindful of, yes, our perception of our progress, but also the state we're in. Now, the third element of momentum is your recent behavior. And so what oftentimes happens is we will have 3 or 4 weeks where we're executing strong and things are going really well. And then we'll have 1 week where we drift or the standard has to change. And so if we're not mindful, it's really easy to start feeling like we're off track when in all reality, we just had a more challenging week. We had a different standard that we had to adjust to that we missed. And it's really important that we start to be mindful of how things might change week to week, because if we're not anticipating what that week might require from us with our time, our energy, our focus, we start to feed into the narrative that we are not taking care of ourselves. And so what's really important is to use a tangible example of what that might look like. For a client of mine, she has this work schedule where she'll work for 7 days straight and then she'll have like 3 or 4 days off. She's a nurse and she manages this unit. And so one of the things we had to establish is, what does the standard have to look like when you're on those 6 to 7 days of intense work? You're working 10 to 12 hours a day. What does the standard have to look like? Versus when you have 3 to 5 days off, what does the standard look like then? If you're not anticipating what that's going to look like, you'll easily fall into the mindset of being off track. When in all reality, all you have to do is adjust the standard to meet that specific week. And so, yes, your recent behaviors do have to adjust so that you keep pushing forward, but it might not look the same as last week, which is why we have to be very mindful of our perception of our progress and our emotional state first. And so if we start to recognize that momentum is the byproduct of these 3 simple patterns, what can we do to right the ship? Well, this is where I'm going to give you a simple framework called R.I.S.E. Okay? So think of it as R.I.S.E. The first step is to remove the drama. Remove the drama. You have to remove the story that you are off track and you are falling short. Because if you do not tell yourself the truth and you do not remove the emotion from it, you are going to continue to stay in this path where you are off track, you are failing, you are behind, versus coming to reality and say, okay, for the last 2 weeks, I have not been as disciplined with my nutrition. Last 2 weeks, I have eaten an extra 1,000 calories than I anticipated. The last 2 weeks, I gained 5 pounds. So, okay, really important to know. There's no emotion behind the way I'm saying this. But if I say, oh my gosh, I can't believe I put on 5 pounds in the last 2 weeks. I can't believe that I am failing again. That intensifies that emotional experience. It puts us in this negative state. And really important, it makes it harder for us to change. So we have to start with a neutral playing ground. We have to remove the emotion. The second thing is we have to identify reality. The way I like to look at it is, where are you actually? Where are you actually right now? So it's 6 weeks in. How far away are you from your goal? How far away are you from your baseline? Did you start here, want to get here, and you're actually here? Okay, that's fantastic. What does reality look like right now? And more importantly, what's the next step? It's so important when you think of momentum. It's not about how far you've gone. It's about how you feel about where you're at. And so in this moment, coming back to reality says, okay, I have drifted for the last 2 weeks, the last 3 weeks. What do I have to do to regain my ground? What are some simple ways that I have to approach the remainder of this month or this quarter to really start to feel like I am on track? If we remove the emotion, we can come back to reality and identify the gap between where we are and where we want to be. And so once you come back, you say, okay, this is where I am. This is where I want to be. I've identified reality. I've come back to my goal. The third step is to start producing small wins. And so in this moment, you're watching this, all you have to do is take one simple action to get back on track. One of the things I tell our clients is consistency is like a light switch. If you're off, it's very easy to get back on. It doesn't require a whole lot of energy. It requires one simple behavior change. And so in this moment, you could ask, what's a small win I could produce right now, today, or this week? Regaining momentum might be setting a goal of, I need to work out 3 days this week, or I need to work out tomorrow, or I need to get 5,000 steps in, or I need to make sure that I add extra protein to my next meal. I need to go to bed at 10 p.m. tonight. Whatever it is, you need to get a small win, because small wins start to put you back in the lane of health. We always teach our clients about the power of keystone habits. A keystone habit is the small habit that influences the rest. And so if you're thinking of everything you could possibly do, you're going to get overwhelmed. But if you focus on the one thing that if you did it would allow you to feel like you're moving in that direction again, what's great is you got momentum automatically. And so if we remove the emotion, if we identify reality and come back to where we actually are, where we want to be, and we start producing small wins, the last thing is we have to elevate the standard. Now, I talk about elevating the standard. What I really mean is you are deciding that this is the standard you're going to consistently live at. This is what most people miss, because they just tell themselves, all right, I'm going to try again, versus fully committing to the goal. You have to stay committed to the target if you want to achieve the target, which means that you have to elevate the standard of the behaviors that you tolerate and expect from yourself daily. Now, I am not saying you have to go be perfect. What I am saying is you have to start building that mental picture of who you are becoming and move in the direction of that identity, of that future version of yourself. So that might be someone who takes care of their body every day. That might be someone who values keeping their promises to themselves. And when I say elevating your standard, you want to pick a standard that you can maintain across all walks of life. So for example, we have another client who, she was talking on one of our team calls, and she said, well, it's really hard for me because sometimes I'm traveling for work, and sometimes I'll have my kids, and then sometimes I'm just at home like working because I don't have the kids that week, and it's me and my husband's time together. So she's like, how do I navigate all these changes? Because when I'm in this category where I don't have my kids and I'm working from home, remote work, really easy for me to be disciplined and on track. But when I'm here, it's a little bit harder. And then when I'm traveling for work, well, there's a certain set of behaviors that I fall into. And so my advice for her was pick a standard that you can have across all of those walks of life. And that might mean you have to change the way you are in some of them, or it might be on the weeks that you have that time, that energy, you set that bar a little bit higher, but you know that on the other weeks you're able to maintain this. Versus the typical pattern where it is all or nothing. You want to find yourself a middle ground where you can say, this is the way I'm going to continue to live. And so what I'm really talking about is if you want to regain that momentum, you just have to recommit. You have to recommit to what you realistically can do. And it's important. If we don't address reality, right? If we don't come back and say, okay, why did I fail? Why was I off track? What happened here? If we don't have that moment where we're telling ourselves the truth, it's going to be really hard for us to recommit to that goal. Because we're going to tell ourselves, okay, I got to re-engage in the same way. It's like, no, based off of where I am, based off of where I want to be, what can I realistically do? And the more you condition yourself to follow through in that way, you'll start to see that momentum stays on your side. And if you lose it for a day, you just recommit. You remove the drama. You say, okay, I said I was going to do this. This is what actually happened. Now what am I going to do? What's the small win I can produce right now? And then how do I continue to see this as me raising the bar for how I lead myself? And so if you are someone who is feeling behind, the good news is you have not failed. You have simply drifted. And in order to regain your sense of momentum, all you have to do is start producing wins today. Don't overcomplicate it. Remove the emotion. Identify what's caused you to fail, what you actually wanted, and where you want to be going forward. Start producing some small wins today, and then decide that this is the way you're going to live going forward, and continue to condition that until it becomes a part of who you are. Again, momentum is not about where you actually are. It's about how you feel about where you are. And so the more you focus on where you're going versus all the reasons why you haven't been perfect, or focusing on all the failures you've had, the easier it is for you to see that, hey, I can produce wins at any time. I have autonomy. I am a leader. So that means that I get to choose what happens next. Leaders don't labor over the failures that they've had. They get grounded, they reassess, they recommit, and they move forward. And that is all you have to do from this point on. Don't labor on everything that's gone wrong. Get refocused, recommit, and start winning again. It's as simple as that. So I'd love to hear, what is your takeaway from this video? What did you take away, and what are you recommitting to going forward? Give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and more importantly, use this, go get momentum, and conquer your day. Cheers.